Können wir starten? Okay, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Here in Glasgow at the IDFC Pavilion at COP26, but also those joining us online for our first side event of the day on Just Do It. A very nice title coming into action, Just Do It, how to implement Paris alignment successfully, a practitioner's view from KfW's sustainable finance team. And our two speakers, I will introduce them in an instant, are joining us virtually, but we have everything prepared for nice interaction here. But maybe, my name is Tobias Hausotter. I'm Head of Program Climate Policy at the Delphi. We are supporting IDFC's climate facility, and I'm very pleased to moderate today's event. So for IDFC, Paris alignment has been a topic for some time already. In 2017, the IDFC members and the MDBs pledged in a joint statement to align their financial flows with the Paris Agreement. And a year later, IDFC published a position paper fleshing out what exactly alignment means. Yet another year later, in 2019, IDFC released a study that would help to operationalize alignment of IDFC members with the Paris Agreement. And earlier this year, an operational framework, which was developed by two independent think tanks, was also developed and published by IDFC that provides clear and practical guidance on how IDFC members, but also others in the climate finance community at large, can reach a better alignment of their strategies, programs, and operations with the requirements of the Paris Agreement. And indeed, also here in the first week at COP26 in Glasgow, alignment has been a key topic also in the finance discussions. So it's very timely, actually, that we have colleagues from KfW joining us to provide insights on how KfW at large, the KfW group, is approaching the topic. And as a transformative promotional bank, KfW takes a particular responsibility for a successful transformation of society at large, taking into account climate issues. And it's a key objective of KfW to successfully provide the best targeted support to its clients and partners in this process. So therefore, KfW Group has developed a forward-looking Paris-compatible sector guidelines for greenhouse gas-intensive sectors, for which we are getting a practical insight today. And I'm very pleased to welcome Jürgen Kern and Carina Brunotte, who are joining us live from Frankfurt. Warm welcome to you. Jürgen is the Director, Corporate Strategy and Sustainability at KfW Group and heading this department, and in this role is responsible for advising KfW's board on business strategies and sustainability. From 2013 to 2018, he was the head of division for energy and mobility for Southeast Europe and Turkey, and before that, country director in Brazil. In previous roles, amongst other things, he was also seconded to the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, being an advisor at the ministry level. Carina Brunotte is a senior consultant for sustainable finance, also in the Corporate Strategy and Sustainability Division. She joined KfW in 2011, worked as a contract and loan manager from 2014 to 2018, and since 2019 is part of the Corporate Strategy and Sustainability Department. She was in charge of the implementation of a group-wide Sustainable Development Goal mapping. And in May this year, she started working in the team on steering sustainable finance and is leading KfW's project on Paris compatibility and greenhouse gas accounting. So a warm welcome to you, both to Frankfurt, and we are very excited now for your presentation and insights on how KfW is dealing with the topic of Paris alignment. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tobias, for the kind introductions and the warm welcome. Good morning from cold Frankfurt. We are pleased to be with you, to be with the colleagues from IDFC, and a special warm welcome, I don't know if they are in Glasgow, but maybe online, to my former colleagues from BNDES and the former colleagues from TSKB, two countries where I worked a lot together with those colleagues, and we had good projects, good success, and also a little bit of fun. So I'm happy to share our experiences with you. We called our presentation, and Tobias, I understand that you will present the slides, so I just will give you an advice when we go to the next slide. I don't see the slides, so I believe you just follow me. So we will go to right straightforward to the introduction. We made the title, we called it Just Do It, How to Implement Paris Alignment Successfully, a Practitioner's View from KfW. Here is the practitioner, therefore I brought Karina. She is project leader for in our transformation program for sustainable finance, and she will give you all the insights. And our intention of this presentation is to share with you our lessons, our approach, how we did it, what worked well, what did not work so well. So maybe you find some hints, some advice what you can implement in your sustainable finance strategy in order to implement Paris alignment successfully. So we believe and do our best to fulfill your expectations. We try to create with this title. Very quickly, if you go to the next slide, Tobias, please. KfW, I guess probably the most of your colleagues know who we are, but just a glance very, very quickly. New business activities in 2020 were 135 billion euros. This is much more than we usually commit. Usually it's around 90 billion. But telling this, if a public bank like KfW is implementing such a huge amount of money, it makes a huge difference to the climate, to the world, to Germany, if we are able to align our portfolio with the Paris goals. We are active in all promotional sectors, to mention SME and private clients, venture capital, also promotion of developing countries, financial markets. We also buy and emit green bonds, and of course export and project finance. And what we will explain today to you is how we handle sustainability on the group level. That means how we bring together all the needs of those different entities or business areas within KfW. Just in a couple of other numbers, our environment investment ratio 2020 has been 33%, a little bit less than usually because of all those COVID-19 programs we had to implement quickly. Our goal is to have an environmental ratio about 40%. So we have already a good starting point, and one core activity of KfW also is SME promotion. So our SME ratio in Germany is 48%. Around about 8,000 employees. We were growing in the past, 80 offices around the world. And that's new since 2018. We are mapping our portfolio to the SDGs, and we're able to map 99% of our portfolio to the SDGs. So that's why we think it makes a huge difference when KfW is able to align to the Paris Agreement. Tobias, next slide, please. How will we structure our presentation? As coming from the strategic department, we will talk about the why very quickly, and not the basics about climate change, the why for a development bank, the what, and then, as I told at the beginning, the how to bring our practitioner's view to you. Next slide, please. So if we dive a little bit deeper in the why, we are a development bank owned by the government. So it's not our purpose, our goal to define public policy. It's the government that defines the policy, and we are rather on that technical level and think about how to implement the agreements that Germany made successfully. So the framework coming from the top is the Climate Protection Program 2013 from the 30 from the government, the Paris Alignment, of course, the SDGs, but also the EU Action Plan, financing sustainable finance, growth, taxonomy, etc., etc. Of course, the guidelines that coming from the German government and the law that was established to found KfW. So that's the legal framework in which we work. If we come then to what we did on the group level, next slide, please, Tobias. So what we first did is we modified our strategic goal set in order to implement the Paris Alignment. And in last year, we touched, let's say, our purpose, that the little house that you're seeing is our strategic framework. And we added transformation of economy and society to improve economic, ecological, and social living conditions worldwide. And the focus was the transformation. We added 2 new goals, which is the SDG contribution from KfW financing, which is already ongoing, the Paris compatibility of KfW financing, and to have also an external view, we added, or we aim at the top positioning in sustainability ratings to get an outside view on the progress that we are making. And therefore, we set up a huge project with, let's say, 4 main columns or areas in which we work. That's the SDG contribution, the Paris alignment of KfW financing, which will be the focus of today, what we present to you. Strengthening of ESG risk management, of course, has to be there because we are a bank. But I would dare to say that ESG risk management is not really a paradigm shift for a bank, and the compliance with the EU taxonomy regulation. Focus today on the Paris alignment, especially, and how we did it. If we come to the next slide, Tobias, please, it's important to say that a role of a development bank, at least in our understanding, is to help the society and the companies to manage that huge transformation that we are ongoing. So we divided, let's say, what our activities to achieve the Paris alignment in several areas. First of all, if you look on those columns that you see, they're going up and down, we focus on the greenhouse gas intensive sectors, because you probably know 10, maybe 12 sectors contribute to 90 or 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's important to focus on those sectors. Then we leave the blue column, everything outside at the beginning, which is not greenhouse gas incentive, because we want to focus and address the relevant sectors. So there are some sectors that we clearly exclude with our exclusion list. For instance, coal or lignite energy, because there is no value added to a transformation. And we shift to the left, the gray one, that are transitional technologies that are not absolutely aligned with the Paris Agreement, but are important in a transition phase. For instance, in the German context, gas energy generated by gas. And the transformative technologies that are in line with greenhouse gas neutrality. Of course, that's the purpose of the development bank. We want to improve or make more commitments in those areas, new programs, new ways of financing, but also we want to address those transitional sectors. So doing more of the green stuff, excluding the brown stuff, and managing the transition phase with our sector guidelines that we will present now. So, having said this, next slide, please. So what are we doing precisely? So just to recall, as I told you in this graph, now how to manage the transition phase sectors. If we come to the next slide, we opted, and that might be interesting for other development banks also, for a science-based approach. Why did we opt for a science-based approach? because as we are not the government, but we are an entity or a bank owned by the government, it's not our goal to make public policy. We have to implement public policy. And then we opted this what we call science-based approach, in order to smoothen for the government, the actors, the stakeholders, the German companies, the SMEs, to accept what we are doing and not engage in a political discussion. So what we did, we chose scenarios from the IPCC, how much carbon has to be reduced. I guess you're all experts in this area. And we decided on 3 to use IEA's climate scenarios. Concretely, we used the Sustainable Development Scenario from IEA and implemented or elaborated together with PwC and Fraunhofer, which is a German research company or a research institution, sector guidelines for 6 greenhouse gas intensive sectors. And what you can see that's important, IEA is using an economic optimization model contributing to different sectors, different greenhouse gas emission reductions, to their role in the economy, to the predicted needs. For instance, shipping will be going up because we assume that there will be more international trade, and the technical possibilities in order to achieve greenhouse gas neutrality 2050. I mean, that's a basic scientific model. They look all around about the same. And it's, again, important that coming from those models, we can define the reduction goals for those sectors, which will be reflected in our portfolio more precisely, and Karina will elaborate later on, in the new commitments, where, I'm telling this already, we include the lock-in phase of the investment that we are doing. So again, important, the science-based approach, or at least that what we choose, it makes sense, that we believe at least it makes sense for a development bank to have somehow a science-based relation in order not to be in too much in those political discussions, which sector should contribute what. If we come to the next slide. So new business management for greenhouse gas intensive sectors through their sectors guidelines. Recall this gray phase on the columns I showed you before, where we want to manage the transition. With our Paris Alliance sector guidelines, we define minimum requirements for climate-friendly technologies under consideration of the expected technical lifetime. That means the lock-in effect. We commit today a new energy plant. We already consider the lock-in effect. We finance a vessel or a ship, a cruise ship. We already include the usual lifetime of this vessel. We don't have a portfolio approach because we are not an asset investor, and we do not intend to sell portfolio, for instance. Therefore, at the moment of commitment. We focus on new commitments in greenhouse gas incentive sectors, I already said, gradually increasing the climate friendliness requirements of KfW finance technologies. Those columns that I showed you before going down. Of course, we know, as we said, we have this scientific approach. Scientific knowledge, technical possibilities will change. So we know that we have to adapt those sectoral guidelines, let's say all maybe 2 or 3 years phases. But we define already now the plan up to 2050. That's important. We know how to reach the goal, but we know also that we have to adapt those passes with new knowledge generated by studies, etc., etc. So there we need this regular review process and science-based approach, regular reviews regarding technological developments and market dynamics for the sector guidelines. Tobias, I'm not sure. I'm on slide 9. I hope you are also on slide 9. And now we come to slide 10 and the how. And I promised you to bring the practitioners, and Karina will guide you through what exactly we did in those sector guidelines. Karina.
Thank you, Jürgen, for explaining us why we work on Paris alignment in a strategic context and what we as KfW do in order to put Paris alignment into practice. Having this big picture in mind, I will focus in the following on how we implement Paris alignment and our steering concept concretely. So we are already on the right slide. So how did we proceed? Jürgen already explained. We focus in the first step on GHG intense sectors, meaning the sectors that are characterized by high greenhouse gas emissions and that are key for reaching the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. But besides, we also analyzed the chosen hotspot sectors regarding to our commitment volume, because only with our commitment volume we can generate an impact. Yeah, and based on the mentioned analysis, we've developed Paris-aligned sector guidelines for the 6 sectors: the shipping sector, the automotive sector, the iron and steel sector, power generation sector, building sector, and the aviation sector. Thereby, I want to mention that all of these sector guidelines have one thing in common. We do not analyze our customers. We only define minimum requirements for the technologically defined purpose of our financed investments, and this enables us the focus of the purpose of our investments to define Paris compatible minimum requirements quite precisely. As you can see in the second and the third column, some sector guidelines cover all new commitments, while others only focus on special GHG intense parts of the value chain. We also chose different type of controls. This is due to the fact that every sector has special characteristics and challenges. So we didn't apply a one-fits-all solution. Instead, we focused on the abilities of each sector. So where greenhouse gas neutral technologies are already marketable, the sector guidelines define more ambitious minimum requirements in the sectors that are just starting developing new greenhouse gas solutions. And this sectoral differentiation helps us to set ambitious but still feasible requirements, which are raised gradually over time. And the feasibility is quite important, because if we set requirements that are not feasible, we cannot generate any impact because due to insufficient demand. Moreover, we also tried to use steering metrics that are common in the market. So the use of well-known market labels and standards as a reference point helped us enormously to make the steering metric manageable for our loan officers and to present the concept in a comprehensive way to our customers. Just to mention one example, the steering metric for the shipping sector is based on the Energy Efficiency Design Index, a metric developed by the International Maritime Organization. Each expert and each customer who wants to buy a ship knows about the ED, and on that basis we've derived our minimum requirements, such that no further data is needed from the customer. That's quite nice. So, but I want to try to make it even more precise, and please switch to the next slide. Let's have a look at the automotive sector. First, in the automotive sector, we analyzed the value chain from the suppliers over manufacturers, production, distribution, the use, and the maintenance. Many suppliers are in other sectors than in the automotive sectors, And that's why we partly excluded the suppliers, because, for example, I cannot tell an automotive manufacturer how the GHG intensity of steel should be. Therefore, we have developed a separate guideline for iron and steel production. But let's go on. The production and research and development, yeah, it's a little bit, we have emissions in this part of the supply chain, but this is not the most intense part. Same for the distribution, it's like a service. But the most GHG intense part is when the customer have bought a car and the cars in the use phase, because the cars on the road in operation, and that's quite GHG intense. But why didn't we define minimum requirements for the use phase? Firstly, I cannot tell a customer how many people should be in the car just to use it efficiently. Secondly, mostly we do not provide consumer loans, and thirdly, consumers often buy products that are only by products that are marketable and available on the market. That's why we have to go a step back and look at the production and research and development, because the highest impact can be achieved by supporting the transformation of the research and development and the propulsion, the powertrain, and the related parts. That's why propulsion, production, and the powertrain is included in our steering concept. For this part, we have defined technical minimum requirements, and I tried to explain how we did proceed. So, as Jürgen already told, we used the Sustainable Development Scenario of the International Energy Agency, which shows the sectoral decrease in GHG emissions. And based on this pathway, the IEA also provides information how the technology structure in the sector has to be. So if we look at 2020, a big share is based on internal combustion engines, and based on this composition, we derived our minimum requirements. However, it's not enough just to focus on 2020, because we have to consider the technological lifetime of the asset, of the car. Because the car is not emitting emissions only in the year of our commitment, it will be on the street for, I don't know, 10 to 20 years. That's why we've assumed a technical lifetime of 20 years. So we have to shift, we have to take a shift in the column and go to the year 2040. As you can see, the part of the share of internal combustion engines is much lower than in 2020, but this is the starting point in 2040, which is that is a reference for our minimum requirements, as you can see in, below. So, how does the steering metric work concretely? We have transformative technologies and transitional technologies, but the transitional technologies are limited. For example, from 2020 to 25 to 48% of all our commitments in the automotive sector. And this limitation will become more ambitious over time. The result is, we have an ambitious steering concept because we consider the technological lock-in. It's quite pragmatic because our customer only have to know which technology they want to finance, and the quota control, like the quota of transformative and transitional technologies, is steered by KfW. That's about the automotive sector. Maybe we can switch to the next slide, because now I want to talk about a sector which is relevant for all other sectors as well, because power generation is a significant part of the upstream chain of other sectors, and that's why it has to be decarbonized drastically. The steering mechanism is also based on transformative technologies, transitional technologies, and exclusions. So we want to focus on renewable energies, which can be committed without any limitations. We already do a lot in case of renewable energies. Jürgen has showed it in the beginning when he talked about the environmental ratio. Nevertheless, we are in the transition phase, and still we have a stable grid network. We take natural gas power plants also into account, but the commitments in natural gas power plants are limited to 1/3 of our commitments in the power generation sector. After 2030, the investments in gas and power plants are only possible on a case-by-case basis with a strict examination, and the modernization of gas technologies is only allowed for the capacity market. The third instrument in the steering mechanism is exclusion. Jürgen mentioned it already in the beginning. Coal-fired plants and nuclear power plants are excluded by our exclusion list already since 2019. Last but not least, I want to give you an insight in the aviation sector, because this sector is quite interesting. According to the Sustainable Development Scenario, the climate targets require that absolute emissions in the aviation sector has to fall to 42% by 2070. We know the path, but the challenge is that no transformative technologies are on the market yet. So what to do? We have the path, but we do not have a mechanism. That's why we didn't focus on technologies in this sector. We worked on a GHG budget. So, sorry. And the GHG budget for the aviation sector decreases over time, and thereby we are systematically limiting our portfolio emissions. So, and the budget is reduced by 2.6% annually. As also in the other sectors, the aviation sector considers the locked-in period of the airplanes. So this is also taken into account, and there's also an incentive to use, so for example, sustainable aviation fuels to reduce GHG emissions, because then, quite more business is possible in this framework. I've talked a lot about energy efficiency. I've talked about technology limitations. I've talked about budgets. I've talked about metrics, and I hope this example has made clear that the transformation is not about black and white. It's not about prohibitions and permissions. Transformation is a chance to shape the developments and creating new business opportunities. And I think the most important fact, or a fact that hasn't to be neglected for that our concept became such successful, is that many colleagues from the domestic and international departments were involved in this process, because of market and customer knowledge, the strategic horizon, and the scientific expertise. It was possible to implement this sector guidelines such successfully. It was not only a strategic project. It was a teamwork. That's the end of my keynote, and I admit the deep dive was quite technically, but Jürgen and I would be very pleased to get an interaction with you. And I'm looking to you, Thomas, to Glasgow. Are there any questions in the audience or in the chat?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I do have a couple of questions, and then maybe I can, well, we can start here in the audience, and then we can continue with others.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
I think so, yeah.
Well, thank you very much to give me the honor to ask the first question. I've got many questions. My name is Carl Kronenberg, EBRD. But let me begin with one question, and that is, if you look at the Paris alignment, it basically consists of two components. One component is the mitigation element, decarbonization. But the other element is climate adaptation or climate resilience. Is this something that you have to take into account in your methodology as well?
Excellent question. Maybe I start, Karina. You remember this slide that I showed where we have the different columns going up and down, and the blue one and the green one. And with the sector guidelines, we focused on this transition phase. The other aspect of the Paris alignment is the adaptation, increase investments in adaptation. So this is something we consider in our core business. It's not just, but in this case, you could call it, it's just another area of promotion within our investments that we are already doing. But I have to admit that to find good adaptation projects is not so easy. Especially, I would dare to say that in developing countries, you can find those easier. But for instance, in Germany, we don't have, for the time being, a notion what would be good adaptation projects, and we have to develop the sectors and to see what we do, invest in the cities, in sewerage systems, etc., etc. But there, also the public policy is still at the beginning. So it's included, but at the beginning we focus on how to manage the transition, which is through mitigation in this case.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for the very interesting and clear presentation. And you focus very much on science-based sector pathways. But in your development banking activities, you work in a very wide variety of markets. And of course, there's a country dimension to Paris alignment and pathways as well. So I want to ask how you take into account in your approach country pathways and specificities.
Also, very good question. Karina, you want to answer?
Yeah, I think the pathways are international, so there's not a specific country focus. We do not take it into account because we focus on the technologies. And of course, some technologies are not the best solutions for some countries, but that's why we show an option. We show all the options that are possible. And in Germany, for example, we also in the building sector we focus on efficiency standards. This is a KfW label, and it's well known in the German market, but we are totally aware of it that it's not applicable for other countries. So then we focused on other labels provided by the European Commission, for example.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And if I just go back in the discussions we had initially in the project, we were discussing whether we can include those country pathways. And we opted exactly to the approach that Karina presented. Nevertheless, now we have a challenge because we focus on greenhouse gas neutrality 2050, while the German government's goal is 2045. So that's where we're coming now to a limit with our sectoral guidelines. But at the beginning, from the conception phase, we opted not to go on the country pathways because we wanted to have a management or steering concept that is applicable for whole KfW group.
Thank you very much for that. Are there further questions here from the audience? Then maybe let me ask you, you outlined that you focus on different technologies and that you have 3 different categories. How did you come up with the categories, and how did you decide on which technology belongs to which category? And is there a process of adding new technologies and moving one technology to another category potentially over time?
Thank you for the question. New technologies can be added in the regular review process and every 2 to 3 years. But if we see there's a significant development in the market, or if there's a quite new technology, brand new breaking technology, which is supported by politics, or which is really good, we can add this technology. And you ask whether we shift technologies from the transformation to transitional technologies. I think the automotive sector made its is quite illustrative, because in the automotive sector we have plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which are transformative till 2025. But after 2025, this technology becomes transitional, because we anticipate that other and better technologies will be on the market. And how we cluster transitional and transformative technologies, that's based on partly it's based on GHG intensity. It depends on the sector. So we have classifications of GHG intensity, for example, in the steel sector. If we are in line with the GHG intensity, it's transformative. It's higher, it's maybe transitional. And after that, below that, we don't, or above that, we do not finance the technologies. And the constellation of transitional and transformative technologies is also derived from the international sustainable development scenario, so science-based.
Okay,
we didn't decide randomly.
We have a question here from the audience. One moment.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I have one question about how do you going to select the criteria you are going to use to select the project. You mentioned in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the European taxonomy. It is something that you are going to use for the European, the domestic project, or to extend it in somehow also for developing countries? Which kind of set framework of criteria you are going to use?
Maybe I can answer the question, and once again, thank you very much. That's an excellent question. So important is that we do want to increase the number of green projects, of course. Therefore, we have our own green investment ratio that I told you at the beginning, which the goal is 38%, and last year we were at 33% because of the corona pandemic, but in the past we already achieved this goal. This is another definition as the EU taxonomy. With the sector guidelines, and that's the important difference, we do not focus only on the green investments, we want to focus on all the greenhouse gas incentive investments of our bank, or commitments of our bank, around about 80-90% of our commitments. The rest is too small to have a good steering concept. So I would say we decided not to use the EU taxonomy, and that's the important point, and I hope that I answer your question with that, for managing our portfolio, or for steering our portfolio. We use, let's say, those sector guidelines for the transition phase, and we use our already established green investment ratio that is calculated on a broader basis than the taxonomy, because the taxonomy in principle only is applicable to Europe. But of course, being a development bank in Europe, we will report a green asset ratio as required in the EU taxonomy, and we will have the goal to intensify our investments that are within the EU taxonomy. But if you look on the whole portfolio, we will have a part of the portfolio which is transformative, where the sector guidelines apply. Then the green portfolio, and there a probably smaller share is the EU taxonomy, which is, let's say, dark green. I hope that this answers your questions.
Thank you very much. Let me see
But
if there...
Yeah,
it was a really good question because the EU taxonomy also defines quite ambitious criteria for green investments, and some colleagues are working on taxonomy conform programs. So, and then we tried to compare the criteria of the EU taxonomy and our criteria of the sector guidelines, and it's quite difficult to compare both because sometimes it's possible, but sometimes well, they use different metrics. So we're still thinking about EU taxonomy, not as a steering metric, but to align our sector guidelines with the taxonomy criteria.
Thank you also for the clarification. Are there further questions here from the floor? Yeah, of course. It's your chance.
Yeah, let me make use of the opportunity to ask I would say a bit more technical question, but that's basically also because of my background working in the EBRD, and we're basically struggling, or let's call it struggling with the same issues. And one of the, I would say, very interesting concepts, so thank you very much for that, is on basically how you approach I would say, new power commitments. Specifically, I would say, only allow natural gas for 1/3 of the new power commitments. I have two questions on that. First, well, basically 3 questions. First, is this country specific or is it overall? The second question is, how do you monitor it? How do you, I would say, track this within the bank? Is at a certain moment, I would say, in a certain year, you're already at 1/3, so you just say, well, no new gas allowed. And the third question is, how do you deal with CHP units in this, where you basically have combined heat and power, and how do you include that in that target as well?
Thank you. Thanks for the questions. So beginning with first, we do not have a country-specific approach. So the 1/3 for natural gas power plants is for all of the commitments we make. Second question is how do we monitor these quotas? So we monitor those quotas mainly based on NACI codes or CRS codes. There's a specific mapping, and there's a steering mechanism that the 1/3 of new commitments have to be reached over a rolling period of time. I think 3 years, but I have to go into deep dive. But it's over a rolling period. And third question, I didn't get it acoustically. Can you please repeat it?
It's more when you have power production in a CSP unit, a combined power and heat production unit. How you deal with that, which is gas powered. We have a lot of them in industry, and also the EBRD has a lot of these projects. And if they're included in this 1/3 or not.
Production, and actually, you can send me an email and I give you the clarification.
Yeah,
I guess it's included when the energy production is so to say in the focus. Pure heat generation is not included. I have to look up in the guidelines, and we have also a methodology paper that is online. I can send you later on the link. I just wanted to add one small clarification. We want to achieve this 1/3 part of the portfolio through the bank, but we will not accept that one business area is doing only gas and the other is only doing green. So we apply the 1/3 quota to each business area in order to prevent that we, for instance, mix development cooperation and export finance and then achieve the 1/3. So it applies not to countries, which is true, but it applies to each business area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there are further questions from the floor here. There is another one, yes.
Yeah, thank you. If I may ask you about your existing portfolio, because as you say, as you know, the Paris Agreement is evaluating the emission on absolute value. So you presented things about the new projects that you are going to finance, but about the existing portfolio, I suppose that you have also existing emissions related to the, I mean, which are coming from your existing portfolio, and some of them maybe could be long-term projects. So how do you deal with that?
Thank you for the questions. You're totally right. We have a large portfolio, but the thing is, we can't change what we've committed in the past. So we don't sell our portfolio. We have these loans in our books. That's why we decided to focus on new commitments and design our new commitments Paris aligned. Nevertheless, you're totally right that we have to be aware of the emissions that are related to our portfolio. That's why we are working on a greenhouse gas accounting as well to determine the starting point where we are with our portfolio today and how we have to decrease this to reach greenhouse gas neutrality in 2050 latest.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I can ask a question. You are working at the group level, so on overarching level. How do you mainstream this approach to the different subsidiaries of KfW? And I don't know, how is that going? How is the discussion going? Is there anything you can share from that discussion a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Karina already mentioned it at the beginning why we believe we were successful. We had from the beginning the involvement of the business areas, and we define minimum requirements. So every business area is free to be more ambitious than we are according to their mission, etc., etc. But introducing those sector guidelines is a new steering concept within the bank. It is a new definition of strategic goals. So you need to do it technically straightforward and sound on the technical level, but you need always the support from the CEO that says, that is one of my top priorities from the bank. I want to be the transformative development bank for the world or for Germany. So it's those two. You need those two levels, and it's tough discussions because you tell people that are managing a portfolio or working in their sector that what they have been doing during the last 20 years, unfortunately now, is not more eligible within your Paris-aligned context. And you have your relations with your customers that you have to engage in discussions with them. So it's a difficult, actually it's a strategic change project where you manage a new source that is scarce like capital in a bank. Now it's the CO2 emissions. So we did not define a budget for CO2 emissions, but we aim at reducing our CO2 emissions through the sector guidelines. And this has to be accepted by everybody, and it takes time. It's nothing you can do, or at least I believe it's nothing you can do within 1 year or something like this. We had a 2-year preparation phase, and now we have a 2-year implementation phase to be there.
Thank you very much for that. Let me see if there are more questions here. No, I do have. I think you started out, Jürgen, by saying you also wanted to share lessons learned and some insights from the process for other IDFC members that maybe embark on a similar journey. What would be the 2-3 main takeaways from your work so far on Paris alignment? What should they do? What should they maybe try avoid doing in order to move forward that discussion internally?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First, you need dedicated staff like Karina that are willing and doing the extra mile in order to get it into the bank, because it is a change. And you need a lot of Karinas, of course. It's nothing you can do with two or three persons in a strategic department. You need to mainstream it and implement it in all the business areas and have a good dialogue as far as possible, first. Second, which we were trying to explain at the moment, where we focus on those greenhouse gas intensive sectors, is somehow keep it simple. It is, of course, not simple because it is super technical, and you go deep in the sectors and say this is financeable, this is not, and code generation questions I even didn't were able to answer. So already the sector guidelines is very complex, but the system itself, at least we believe, is simple, because we give a guideline to a project manager who is financing in the shipping industry. He knows all the types of vessels and is able to look it up and see, now I can finance this and can finance that. And the third, that at least in our context, is it was helpful to have a scientific approach. We had Fraunhofer in this case with us, which gives you also, if you engage in those complicated political discussions, it might be within the bank or with the stakeholders, you have somebody who tell, okay, but that's what the science is telling us. And then the discussions somehow are a little bit more based on facts and not on political goals. I would say those were the three things that come to my mind if I would share lessons learned with you.
And I think the learning process hasn't ended, because it's quite there's quite a huge dynamic in the market. After our government has declared that they want to achieve GHG neutrality in 2045, there were a lot of scenarios published on the market for this new goal. So, and this haven't been before, and it's quite challenging to have a look at all these dynamics and developments in the market. I think, yeah, it's a never-ending story.
Thank you very much for that.
Maybe last but not least, we only focused on loans and commitments where we have a technologically defined purpose. Of course, we have also commitments to corporates where general corporate loans where we do not have this technologically defined purpose, and that's quite a big challenge. So we're working on it, but yeah, we have not the solution yet.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm looking around if there are any last questions here from the audience. That does not seem to be the case. So thank you very much, Jürgen and Karina, for sharing these insights and KfW's approach on Paris alignment. I guess you just mentioned, Karina, there's lots to learn still. So there's, I guess, also plenty of room to exchange with other IDFC members and other colleagues in the field on how they are each doing on Paris alignment, and how learnings from different institutions can maybe help to make the system also better or further refine the system moving into the future. So thank you very much from Glasgow. Oh,
thank you very much from Frankfurt for the kind invitation.
There's indeed one last question here. I was not a question.
Yeah.
Huh? Hold on.
An invitation to present what you presented this morning to a meeting with the IDFC members could be very nice if we can share. You can share this what you are doing with other members. Maybe we can organize that in the next future. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your good questions, and have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
And thanks for hosting. Thanks to IDFC for hosting this event.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.